Hi everyone. Hope you are good. We are here for grade 7 math. You can find all the lessons on aplusstudents.com. You have to in there using your email address and password as provided by the administrator. Then you have to select math from the subject tab, scroll down to grade 7 math, and then click on view all lessons. There you can find the rest of the chapters. We can start chapter integers. The lessons we came to cover today are understanding integers, absolute value and opposite integers, integer inequalities with absolute values, and integers on number lines. So please make sure you have your notebook and pencil so that you can note down the important examples and definitions as well. Okay, here I'm on grade 7 math chapter we're on right now. Integers. Let's just start with the first lesson, that is understanding integers. Why we use, right? Basically, integers are used for representing the whole numbers with both positive and negative signs, right? So integers are used to perform mathematical operations like add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Also, sometimes you have to represent the increases. So increases are always represented by increases, profits. They are always represented by the positive numbers. Same way the decreases and loss are always represented by the negative numbers. So let's just start with an example. Which integer represents the scenario? An elevator rises 3 floors. That would be positive 3. Which integer represent this scenario? 10 milliliter decrease in volume. So always represented by the negative number. So that would be negative 10. A positive number can represent a gain or an increase, and a negative number can represent a loss or decrease. Let's just start with the test questions. Which integer represents the scenario? Removing 8 plates from a stack. So removing means loss it is, right? Losses are usually represented by the negative numbers. So that would be negative 8. Option number 1 is the correct option. Negative 8 it is. Present this scenario. 1 gallon increase in volume. So 1 gallon increase means Positive one it is. Option number 2 is the correct option. That would be 1. Which integer represents the scenario? $4 price reduction. That is reduction. So then negative it is. That is negative 4. Option number 2 is the correct. 1 is the correct option. Which integer represents the scenario? 3 degrees warmer today than yesterday. So warmer means the increase in temperature, right? So the correct option is 3. Option number 2 is the correct option. Which integer represents the scenario? A puppy grows 2 centimeter longer. Option number 2 is the correct option. Which integer represents the scenario? Removing 5 cars from a train. Op- Option number 1 is the correct option, negative 5. Which integer represents the scenario? $9 discount. So that means negative 9. Option number 1 is the correct. Which integer represents the scenario? 8 degrees above 0. That is option number 2. That is above 0. So then that would be a positive number. Okay, you can complete the lesson by yourself later today. Let me just move on to next lesson. The next lesson is absolute value. With what is the opposite of negative 9? So opposite of the negative number is the same number on the other side of the zero. So on the other side of the zero, there would be a positive number. So the opposite of negative 9 is 9. Let's just with the test questions. What is the opposite of 1? Opposite of 1 is negative 1. Option number 1 is the correct option. What is the opposite of negative 5? Opposite of negative 5 is 5. Option number 2 is the correct option. What is the opposite of negative 8? Opposite of negative 8 is 8. Option number 2 is the correct option. What is the opposite of 4? Opposite of 4 is negative 4. Option number 1 is the correct option. What is the opposite of negative 10? That is positive 10. Option number 2 is the correct option. What is the opposite of 6? Opposite of 6 is negative 6. Option number 1 is the correct option. What is the absolute value of 5? That is 5. Option number 1 is the correct option. What is the opposite of 6? Opposite of 6 is negative 6. Option number 2 is the correct option. What is the opposite of 1? Opposite of 1 is negative 1. Option number 1 is the correct option. What is the absolute value of 7? So absolute value of 7 is 7. Absolute values are always the positive values. What is the absolute value of 2? Absolute value of 2 is 2. Option number 1 is the correct option. What is the absolute of negative 5? So absolute value of negative 5 is positive 5. Option number 2 is the correct option. Okay, lesson by yourself later today. Let me just move on to next lesson. The next lesson is integer inequalities with absolute values. Let's start with the test questions. Which sign makes the statement true? So here we have -5, right? And here we have the absolute value. Absolute values are always the positive value of -5 is 5. So -5 is less than 5 because the negative always less than the negative numbers are always less than the positive numbers, right? So -5 is less than 5. Option number 1 is the correct option. Yes, it is. Which sign makes the statement true? So we have -4, -4, we need to compare it to absolute value of -6. So absolute value of -6 is +6. So -4 is less than 6. The correct option is less it is. Option number 1 is the correct option. Which sign makes the statement true? 7, you need to compare it to absolute value of -7. Absolute value of -7 is 7. So 7 is equal to 7. 2 is the correct option. Which sign makes the statement true? -2 is less than 0. -2 is less than 0. Option number 1 is the correct option. Which sign makes the statement true? 8, you need to compare it to absolute value of 4. Absolute value of -4 is 4. So 8 is less than 4. Option number 1 is the correct option. Oh, 8 is greater than 4. Greater it is. Which sign makes the statement true? Absolute value of 3 is 3 and 3 is greater than 0. Greater it is option number 2 is the correct option. Which sign makes the statement true? They both are exactly equal, so 4 is equal to 4. So 1 is greater than negative 3, greater it is. Okay, very good. You can yourself later today. Let me just move on to next lesson. The next lesson is integers on number line. Type the missing number. So the number is missing on the right side. So the missing number is 5. That would be side of the 0, so that would be 5. Let's just start with the test questions. Type the missing number. The correct option is option number 1, 3 it is. number is missing? That is 7. Option number 2 is the correct option. Type the missing number. That is 1. Option number 1 is the correct option. Type the missing number. The missing number is -2. Option number 2 is the correct option. Type the missing number. That is 2. Option number 1 is the correct option. Type the missing number. That is -3. Option number 2 is the correct option. Type the missing number. That is -4. Option number 2 is the correct option. Type the missing number. The missing number is 5. Option number 2 is the correct option. Okay, you complete the lesson by yourself later today. So we were working on grade 7 math. Chapter we were working on is the lessons we have covered today are understanding integers, absolute value and opposite integers, inequalities with absolute values, integers on number lines. So please make sure before the next session you can complete all the practice questions for the lessons we just until next session. So if you need more help with any of the lessons on the live chat, no questions. Okay, then that's all for today. See you in the next session. Bye everyone.